Welcome to the BrewKnowledge Podcast, brought to you by Brewlogix. Sales is essentially an exchange of value between people, and marketing is a way to facilitate this. But this can be a complex interaction, just like any other relationship. Our next guest is an expert in both sales and marketing and will help you navigate the process no matter who you work with. But first, Dan had another great question.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the BrewKnowledge Podcast brought to you by Brewlogix. Super excited to again have Jeremy Storton and Josh Lindsay here, who are both advanced Cicerones. In this part of the podcast, I get to pour my thoughts and questions out of my head and get some expert opinions from my good friends here. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here again and listening to what comes out of my brain. I have a good one for you this week.
Right on.
All right.
Ready.
So let's talk about. So in my background, I was a sales rep, a state manager for a brewery, and this is back in 2017 to 2020, 2021 time. And during that time, you talk about staff education, you talk about distributor education, retailer education. When the product that I had was not born in state of Indiana, where I was living and working at the time, spreading the gospel of that beer. Part of my job was to go out and to educate consumers, whether that's through samplings or through other tasting events. I also had to educate retailers, go to each retailer that brings in a new product, talk about that product, maybe leave a sales sheet behind, and as well to the distributors. We had our chances at the once a month meetings. If you got picked to be there, if you had a new release, you got more of an opportunity to go there. But even as they brought in new, staff members on the distributing side, it was always a constant process for me to educate those people to go out and sell that product to the masses. So as times have changed, sales reps are getting asked to do more things. Maybe breweries are lessening their sales force out in the streets because distribution has changed up so much. Coming from your different angles, where do you guys see education playing a piece in both, the distribution side or even out, if someone is selling on their own, educating those retailers, educating, the staff members within those maybe on-premise, places, things like that. What are some of the changes and what are some of the evolvements that have happened over a few short years here? Josh, I'll let you go first to kind of talk about your experience and where you've been and where you see it evolved.
Yeah, my background was in education, everything from consumers to our internal staff to retailers to distributors. So I think when you go back to the early 2010s into the 2010s, we were not necessarily educating as much on our products as we were on beer as a whole. What is beer? What is it made of? I think everybody had the definition in their head of fizzy yellow liquid, which is fine. That definitely qualifies. But there was a lot more that was being showcased as craft beer began to really boom. So, I think in my background, in the early days of education, it really was like, hey, here's what hops are. Here's different flavors that come from hops. Like, there's different ingredients and types of malt and things like that. And all of those have contributions. So we spent a lot more time on process and then incorporated, what made our beers unique with that. And key flavor profiles with retailers was really kind of the important thing. As the industry has progressed and as time has passed, it became a lot less of process and more, what other factors make your product unique. And then really got into, especially with retailers, the beer math. Like the new shiny element of beer had kind of gone away where, hey, if you brought something cool and unique, you were on the shelf. And it really shifted to, what are my profit margins? How is this going to sell? What is rate of sale and things like that. So, I think again, education about beer and the product is always at the core. But I would guess to sum that up, the shift really was in the beginning, we were just kind of educating people on the category. As time has passed and where I see us today is it's more the business side of beer. Not that we've lost the romance. I preach about romance and beer all the time, but I think it's less important to a lot of folks when you're having that conversation and more the key characteristics, key differences as people have become more educated, which is great. I mean, this is the best time in history ever to be a beer drinker, in my opinion.
Totally. Jeremy, what's from your angle, talking about educating maybe taproom staff and things like that, as owners look at this as they bring in these new staff members that they just hired off the street. Some may have craft beer experience, some may not have craft beer experience. And consumers are looking when they go into these breweries to have this elevated kind of educational experience, right? The standards are a little bit higher when you go into these breweries and these craft beer bars. What's your take on kind of the involvement and maybe a good tip or two for some operator or manager to take away to help increase their staff knowledge nowadays?
Yeah, I always got to go back with a story. I think back into the '90s when I was really of legal drinking age and really starting to visit the microbreweries, and they were all just starting to kind of sprout up for real. I remember walking in and it's just, I always got the two beers with the three letters. I always got those confused, and I'd have to ask every time because one I loved and one I hated. And the one I loved was the ESB. The one I didn't like was the IPA. And every time I had to ask the bartender or whatever, is which one is which, and they had to know. They had to know just the basics. But I mean, this is the '90s. That was all you had to know back then. Then you fast forward to 10 years later, I'm working in an Italian restaurant and we bring Franziskaner in for the first time. And it's a really good Italian restaurant in Orange County, California. And they've got wine and grappa and all this other stuff. And they brought in some really good beers. And they showed us, and that was kind of like a moment for me where they showed us how you take this Franziskaner, you take this specific glass, you're going to pour it down the side, then you're going to swirl the glass, and then you're going to finish pouring it. And you're going to do this ceremony in front of your guests because they're going to fall in love with that romance that Josh was talking about, because this is a different beer. It was the experience. And there was a discussion of these are great food pairings to go with this beer. And this was 2000. And I was just thinking, holy cow, what's up with this? And that was one of those waypoints that propelled me to where I am now. These days, I agree with Josh. We're in a place where it's tough. For distributors as well as breweries, and we kind of we need to think about who it is we're talking to. It's a completely different process if you're on the distribution side or if you're a brewery side. But if we're talking to the tap room, if the three of us own a tap room and we want to have our staff sell this beer and create that romance, then we don't necessarily have to spend all the time understanding all the beer styles in the world. We don't have to understand all the nuances and off flavors and how beer is made to the nth degree. We don't need to know anything about turbid mashing, right? We just need to know, what is this beer? What does it taste like? And what is it amazing with? And it can truly start out as a script. It can truly start out as, here are some bullet points for you to memorize for this beer. And then as you experience the beer, as you expand your experience and knowledge, then you can riff on that idea. And that's really what I hope that taproom managers and owners are sharing with their staff and training them with their staff on a daily basis. And that would be a total game changer because it's not being done across the board.
So
I think that's a good point too, Jeremy. Oh, sorry, Dan. Just real quick, when you think about how beer has progressed with our generation and how we all came into beer, there is a new generation coming to beer, and I think sometimes we forget that the people who are coming in the tap room today aren't necessarily the same people who were coming in 10 years ago, or there is a new group. And I know I'm guilty of just assuming that everybody knows what an IPA is at times, or everybody knows what Citra and Mosaic are, the two cheater hops. But the reality is that's not true. Everybody doesn't know that. So, I think even you just asking this question, has me going back in my brain where it's like, hey, sometimes you've got to be smart and really be thoughtful and gauge who you're speaking to. And I think if we can do that, we'll likely be in that cyclical nature that we often see with beer, where it's like, maybe it is time to start going back to the basics a little bit, and having those conversations and have this next generation or this new group of folks who are coming into tap rooms fall in love with the same thing that we did. Again, now it's way better to be drinking beer now than it was 20 years ago from a quality standpoint and from the availability standpoint. So it's like, let's just share that excitement that we have. And I think oftentimes, I'm guilty of it as well, being the old curmudgeon where it's like, everybody knows this stuff already, but that's not true.
because there's always going to be someone new that doesn't know the difference between an ESB and IPA. And we need to make sure we continue to tell these stories so that everyone knows and discovers beer just like the three of us did.
For sure.
So my big takeaway, I think, to challenge both brewers to share this quality piece of information, and also, maybe retailers and on-premise managers when they're buying these new beers or bringing these new beers online. I think the three questions that you mentioned, Jeremy, was what is this beer? What does it taste like? And what does it go great with? I think those are great, three great points that can be very simple, summed up easily, that a staff member can retail, that information to a consumer, whether they're, pouring it on premise or selling it off premise. So I like those three key takeaways.
Yeah. As you're building materials and training your staff, I think if you answer those three questions, you're going to be off to a great start. If not,
Better
kind
than
of have
most.
a good story. Absolutely. I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah. Gentlemen, that's my question of the week for this time. So thank you for your time, and be ready for another hot one next week.
All right.
Right on. Cheers.
Cheers. The Brewlogix craft beverage community drives on-premise profitability through our unified technology platforms. Go to brewlogix.com to get started. And now, our interview with Julie Rhodes, founder of Not Your Hobby Marketing Solutions. Hey everyone, welcome back to the BrewKnowledge Podcast, brought to you by Brewlogix. I'm your host, Jeremy Storton. I'm an advanced Cicerone, and I've spent a few days, few weeks, few months, few years in the hospitality industry with a strong focus of beer. Any of you have watched this before or watched some of my other work on Good Beer Matters or Sense of Beer Style, you know that I'm here with you. We've got Dan here is part of Brewlogix, and he is the one that brought this all together, and he's the one that's trying to make all of our lives a little bit better through the work that he's doing. But of course, Dan, you and I, co-hosts, are here to talk to our very, very good friend, Julie Rhodes. Julie Rhodes is in the house, everyone. For the two of you that are watching this that don't know who Julie is, Julie is a sales and marketing expert with her business, Not Your Hobby Marketing. She's a writer. She's a speaker. She's the 2023 Brewers Association Industry Award winner. High fives there. You teach online courses. You consult with clients, big and not so big. You have decades of diverse experience and success to draw from. The thing I love is, here we are. It was beer that brought us all together, but it's not. But beer isn't the only thing here. So you say at least on your website, you teach craft brands, not craft beer brands, but all craft brands, how to work smarter, not harder, right?
Yes, absolutely. At least that's the hope.
That's the hope. But I mean, we're talking about all of our brothers and sisters and cousins in the craft world, the kombuchas, the ciders, the anything and everything. I mean, we all can do a better job. And Julie, you're here to help us do that. Anything you want to add to all this, Julie? Did I miss anything?
No, that was a really good nutshell of everything that I do, which is fantastic. It doesn't surprise me because we know each other well. So no, I think that's great. Thank you very much. And thank you for the kind words.
Well, just thank you for being awesome and for being here to share your awesomeness with us. Dad, what do you want to add? You want to add anything to this? You want to launch into some questions or?
No, I'm ready to jump in. I want to hear Julie's, talk about some of these things that we're so curious about, because I've heard her talk before, and I know she's got some wise wisdom to what she has to say. So, to jump in, really, Julie, it's 1st of January, 2024. I think we all three of us been in industry for a while. We've seen it really grow and blossom and expand and all these crazy things. And going into 2024, as we're talking specifically about tap rooms and breweries, and specifically draft craft beverage, what's just some of the takes that you have going into 2024? Some changes that some of these operators and owners should start looking at going into 2024, just specifically in their draft programs that they may not have looked at before, or maybe something they got to look at hard, and maybe that's changing up their lineups, changing up their buying processes, and things like that. Just kind of as a whole, what's the draft programs looking like for 2024?
Whew, that's a lot to unpack. There's a lot in here, and I want to say if I could boil it all down to kind of one thing, and I hope people listening don't take this verbatim and like too harsh. But I'm going to go back to something that I've been saying for the past couple of years, and that is the best thing that I can tell people. The one thing is that hope is not a strategy. And that pretty much applies to every facet of your craft beverage business at this point, but especially draft, own premise, however you want to look at it, on premise, if you're in wholesale, things like this. The reason I say that is not because I want to be Debbie Downer and, I'm not trying to be negative in any way by saying like, you can't hope that your business is going to do better. But what I'm really saying with this is that you need to have a clearly defined business strategy. And while, the past, if you go back pre 2020 and then look at that previous decade, like from 2010, to 2020, it was pretty much this. If you say that you're a craft beverage, like people are just, whoa, gonna flock. Like it's here, right? Like we're, and now, and I don't want to say craft as a segment is like old hat in any way, shape, or form. I don't think we're going anywhere at all, by the way. Not a bubble. I'm not a bubble person. So I'll just clear that up right now. But I'm saying that business strategy is more important than ever. There's a lot of us in the pool. We have to share space with everybody. The folks that are, taking a really hard look at numbers, production, efficiencies, marketing tactics, sales tactics, things like that. Getting creative with their tap rooms, using space efficiently, things like that. That's the kind of strategy that I think people should be looking at heading into 2024. And also, it's a good rule of thumb every year, but especially because with the way the economy is and the cyclical nature of the beverage industry as a whole, there's some other beverage alcohol categories that are doing better than others right now. We're sort of in a valley, right? But it will come back up. So, better to get ahead right now, get really clear about where you want to take your business, what you're going to do with it, knowing your numbers, knowing the financial terms, the ins and outs of marketing, where you want to be selling, what you want your brand image to be, things like that. If you can work all of that out right now, it's going to do you all the good in the world looking long term at the future of your business.
Well, you just mentioned getting creative with your tap room. Can you provide an example of what that means? I mean, and we're talking to, the small mom and pop brewery to the big chains. I mean, what are we talking about exactly?
Yeah. So, y'all have been in the industry like me for a while, like back in the day, it was like if you had a pint night, that was like, whoa, we have a pint night. Like, right, we get a glass or something,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
whatever that looked like. Or,
And now everyone has way too many glasses in their cupboard.
right, exactly. So, or there were like really elaborate like beer dinners that were like years ago, you know what I mean? And people would sign up to go and it was a big, big like special occasion and all this kind of stuff. Um, we're just not seeing the ROI on activities like that anymore, especially in your tap room. I consistently talk these days, to bring it up to modern times with my clients and colleagues and friends. And we say that you have to have a tap room and blank. Does that make sense to you guys? So it's got to
Totally.
be like tap room with food or tap room and games or tap room and live music, right? So like tap room and blank, like insert whatever accent that you can put on there. And some people might have multiple accents. It might be food, live music, trivia, event space, hospitality. You know what I mean? Like it could go on and on and on. You look at somebody that has like a golf course or, pickleball court or whatever
Yeah,
it is,
totally.
right? So this shift that we saw after 2020, with the way people go out and the way they spend their leisurely time, especially associated with drinking, it looks different than it used to, right? So a beer dinner, a tap takeover, a pint night used to be, that was like a special occasion, right? So people would get up, get dressed, get out of their house. That was like that was motivating for them to come out. And as more and more brands did that, and it became kind of commonplace, and then there's other factors. I'm not going to say the C word and all that stuff that happened over the past handful of years, but people go out differently now. So they're, drinking more at home. So when they do go out, it needs to feel special. It needs to feel unique. So that's why they're looking for craft beer and, you know, the office trivia night. You know what I mean? Like
That's
it's something that there's like an interest that they have. It's a special reason to go out.
Something that hits me recently. I just saw somebody speak about like, hey, I'm tired of looking at your chicken tender special on Instagram, right? Like, I get you have chicken tenders, right? And this leads into the whole craft thing. I think to your point, like pint nights are no longer a draw. They're not bringing in, if a craft brewery is going to sell into a retailer, hey, I'll come to a pint night. Like, it's no longer bringing that draw or that ROI, specifically for the brewery, but also, really bringing in people for that event. And nowadays, as I think that I think that a lot of retailers need to look at local craft breweries and say, hey, how can we partner to make something special that will draw people in? So when I do look on, the social medias, it's, hey, X, Y, and Z breweries coming by. They have a really cool, special release. It's going to pair with the chef, is making this special dish for this one night. And, it's, a great craft beer and a great meal. And, maybe the brewer is there to speak a little words. Maybe the chef's there to speak a little words about the food pairings. And then like, hey, why don't you take something home with you and recreate this night at home? It's much more involved, and there has to be a lot more thought behind what you're putting out there. But I just thought that was really interesting. You said the pint nights are no longer there, which I agree. They're not driving people into seats, into these places. But to the point is, there's still opportunity to strike. And what are people looking at nowadays, on social media and things like that, that is saying, hey, I want to take my spouse out to that place for this night because of this. And I think that's kind of where the creation and the creative side of things has to come to nowadays. But yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting insight right out of the gate there.
Well, and
Absolutely.
I think that's brilliant too, is to kind of expand the thought process. And I've seen other breweries do this before. I've done this when I worked for a brewery where we partnered with a grocery store. You mentioned this, Dan, and it kind of got me to remember this, where one brewery had this incredible recipe for steak nachos, and so they put here are all the ingredients for your steak nachos, pairs amazingly with our beer. So now we have this super stack of our beer and some little tear off things. Like, now here, go shopping to pick up these ingredients to make these steak nachos at home, and don't forget to grab a 12-pack. And so now your grocery store is promoting the brewery, which is promoting the grocery store, and vice versa. And who wins? The customer. And so these are things that you can do even if you're a small craft brewer of some sort. And so thank you for answering that question, but I think we just fleshed out a few different ideas to do that. One of the other ways of looking at this whole conundrum is, let's say Dan and I own a brewery and we're trying to figure out, what beer to sell so we can sell more and get more people to come in and everyone's happy. But at some point, we're also going to work with distributors, right? And Julie, you and I have talked about distribution before, and in reality, they are logistics. They get whatever the widget is, they get the widget from point A to point B. But they're also partners in working with the on-premise. They're also partners working with the off-premise. They're also partners working with the breweries who are creating these products to begin with. What's your advice on working with these distributor partners to facilitate better sales, better experience, all that sort of stuff?
Right. There is, well, first and foremost, I want you to know I am not against distribution. I hear sometimes people go very negative with don't get into distribution. And I get it. I understand the finance of it, right? Like, you keep your margins, self-distribute if you can, like you make more money in your tap room. Just all the finance people, just please calm down. I'm on your side. I get it. I don't want any hate mail after this from my finance friends. But there is a certain intrinsic value to being in the wholesale channel that I don't want people to forget about. And I would say that's where this like marketing piece comes into things. It is beneficial to have your brand out there, to have it in multiple locations so that people can see it and get to know you and your brand story and your product lineup and to sort of implant it in their brains as like a point of familiarity. That's brand awareness. That's what brand awareness is. Like we're just building that, right? So they might see it somewhere, and then maybe they see something online for your tap room, and then they wind up in your tap room, right? Like that's a win-win, right? So I think working with distributors these days, this is hard. This is something that I've done for a very long time in my career, honestly. And I've seen iterations of this. Again, it goes in a cycle, right? Like our industry does, or like the economy does. Like sometimes things are really great with distributor partnerships, and other times, we have like some like problem areas. But I would say the biggest thing for suppliers to probably realize is that they are a partner, right? And together you're working towards the same goal. You want to sell more product together, whether it's beer, cider, seltzer, RTDs, whatever it might be. Ultimately, they're a business partner, and I think supplier, and I'm probably going to get yelled at for this too, but it's okay. I unapologetically say that suppliers these days need to understand that the distributor tier is mostly logistics. It's not a lot of sales. And so while
Yeah.
there can be marketing support, and there's marketing budgets, and they help you do events and get your places, get your product places,
But that's not
and
their primary role.
but that's not their primary role. So
Yeah.
we as suppliers cannot expect fireworks, when it comes to the sales department. So know that you need to have a sales layer, and they have a sales layer, and you work better together. You know what I mean? When you're bouncing things off of each other. So I would say one of the number one things that I tell people about distributor relationships is communication. Over communicate if you can. Make sure y'all are on the same page. Make sure you've said, these are my expectations. This is where I want to take my brand. This is what I want to do in the market. This is who I'm selling to. This is where it's working. This is where it's not working. You can't over communicate with your distributor partner. And then that way you're all on the same page, because they have a business model and you have a business model, and they're going to kind of function. Hopefully that makes sense. But I
Yeah,
just
no, absolutely. But
people to kind of coincide and jive better together.
if Dan and I owned a tap room and or a bottle shop receiving stuff from the distributor, what about that relationship? What advice do you have for that group?
I would say, for one thing, be a little bit understanding with our current market conditions. I'm going to get all technical with like economics and unemployment and labor market and all that good stuff, but there's not a lot of folks that are working in the distributor tier right now. So first and foremost, be patient with your rep. They probably have a very large route. Like I'm talking hundreds of accounts. The typical distributor sales rep probably juggles 100 to 150 accounts a week, which is a
Yeah.
crazy amount of visits,
Yeah.
right? So just try to be empathetic with them. Ask a lot of questions. What do you have that's new? What just came out? What's special? What have other people been buying? You know what I mean? Do you have the contact info for a supplier rep? Like, who's a good supplier rep to talk to? Like, do you have samples? Can you bring me samples? You know what I mean? I think the more questions that you can ask, the better, because then that gives them something to go off. Because most likely, not only do they have a ton of accounts, right? But they probably have a very large portfolio of all different kinds of products. And they're sort of trying to feel out like what works best for you. So give them hopefully I answered your question the right way. I think I did. I don't know.
No, you totally did, and I think just from
Okay.
my experience, I've worked in all aspects of this stuff, and I think for those anything I would share is for that tap room manager, owner, whoever you are, if you're in charge, is you can't rely. This is going to sound bad. Let me qualify this. You can't rely extremely heavily on the distributor to make all your decisions for you and solve all your problems. You have to own that yourself and use them as a guide and as a partner. But you have to do the work. You have to understand the stuff, and that's where talking to the actual brewery reps comes in. I mean, Dan, I think you were going to ask about that too.
Well, yeah. So, one of the questions I have, like nowadays, as as stated, the distributor reps are spread so thin, right? They don't have a lot of time to spend in there and whether you call it educating, informing, these products. And, there's a layer between the actual, maker of the product and then, the retailer. And that's the rep there. How can these breweries you know get the right messaging to the retailers, about their products, about their brand? And also, is there, on the flip side, is there a good way for possibly retailers to receive that information if the rep is so busy that they just don't have time to access it or time to print off a sales sheet as simple as something like that? Like, have you helped some of your breweries like get that information out there in an easy way, in a way that gives them, opportunity to make more distribution points and maybe more volume at that point?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of there's different levels to this, right? So, you know, if you look at, like, say I'm a supplier and I have a brewery, right? And I'm representing my brand. I first and foremost, do you have sales materials? Do you have marketing materials? And the information contained on those, is it relevant to me as a distributor and is it relevant to me as a buyer? This is something that I see that is lacking a lot of the times. And people, not everybody knows this. This is not like common knowledge, but think about it. If you were a buyer, what's kind of like typical tactical information that you would need from a supplier rep, right? Like, just, name of the brewery, type of product you're offering, the different package sizes, the price point, who distributes it, or do you distribute it? Who do I order from? Contact information. You know what I mean? So, like, I guess my piece of advice here, whether you're coming from retailer to distributor or supplier to retailer or supplier to distributor, put yourself in that other person's shoes and think about their decision making process and then start connecting the dots, right? Like, am I offering the things that they need to know to purchase? Am I giving them that in some way, shape, or form? Do you have to have all the bells and whistles and fancy stuff? No, you don't. It can be a sales sheet on a piece of paper. It could be a Word doc, like with some bullet points on it. Like, so but
Right.
the more
Yeah.
information that person has, the more informed decision they can make, and the better it helps them make a purchase decision, because that's the process that they're going through in their head, and everybody goes through that at different levels: customer, retail buyer, like account buyer, distributor rep. It's a big giant circle, right? So I think really putting yourself into that spot and thinking, what would I need to know to buy this? Or what would this person want to know if they were going to buy from me? And
Well,
vice versa.
and this is that's a perfect segue, because you said we're all part of the circle: the brewer, the distributor, the on and off premise. We're all part of the circle, and at the very center of that circle is the customer. That's why we're all doing this. It's not
Yeah.
just like, hey, check me out, I brewed some beer, got a medal, pay me. No, it doesn't work.
No,
I've tried. I've tried. It doesn't work.
yes,
but
I,
but at the center, we have to deliver this product and more importantly, this experience to a customer who's willing to pay us for it. Um,
mhm.
and so keeping that all in mind, both of you know that staff education is paramount for me. At whatever level, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to know your product. As a distributor, you've got way too many products to keep it all straight, and so that's where you have like those sales sheets or shelf talkers, and you have tools, you have things that can help you do that. But when it comes to, we're running out of time, so I'm going to focus this question just on the on-premise or even the off-premise. People who are going to work with the customers at the center of the circle. What role does a higher product education play in this whole process of moving these products and creating that experience?
Oh, huge. So, here's the deal: is that if you think about it, uh, okay, how can I boil this down quickly? As a supplier rep, I'm not going to buy my own products. That's not my job, right? I might know what I'm talking about, right? But the people that are on the front line selling it, can you trust that they're saying the same thing that you're saying? right? There's a
Yeah.
very small window. Some people say 5 seconds. That's like the impression window that you have in off premise, like when you're just looking at a shelf. Some people say on premise, maybe like 30 seconds, a minute or two, something like that, for someone to have like a conversational exchange of kind of feeling out what that person might want. And ultimately, it comes down to like a point of familiarity, right? Am I familiar enough with this product or this brand or XYZ, whatever it is, so that I feel comfortable talking about it in a very small amount of time, like very quickly, right? And I'm trying to tie this to on and off premise.
Yeah.
Off premise, that's your brand story on your label. That's all you get, unless you're going to creepily follow people around the grocery store and ask them what they're going to purchase, and then explain that your alt beer is not really an
Yeah,
amber
we're not
lager,
pollsters.
but it's actually, you know what I mean? Like there's a, you don't have time to go into that kind of like explanation, right? So you have like a
Yeah.
split second to make that impression and make it seem like, oh, this is familiar to me. I have expectations for whatever brand this is, and so I'm going to make a decision right then and there. On premise, you want to make sure that person that greets them, whatever point of service it is, server, bartender, whatever it might be, beer tender at a tap room, do you know what kind of questions to ask? And then when those people give you certain answers, do you know how to respond? And if you have good rapport with those people, that's great, because you have a relationship. There's a trust. There's a trust with information, right? And the more information they have, the better they're going to be able to pivot and suggest certain things that fits that customer's taste profile, their preferences, things like that. So I cannot say enough. I'm sure, Jeremy, you're going to love that I say this. I can't say enough good stuff about staff education, whether it's behind the bar, in a store, at the distributor level, any of that stuff. More education, the better, because then it's like matchmaking at that point. I have
Oh,
the
totally.
knowledge, right? I'm talking to the customer, I'm asking questions, I'm getting to know them. And now in my brain, I can, figure out a match for them beverage wise.
Well, if I were to go buy a car, I'm going to have some questions about that car. And if
Mhm.
the salesperson says, "Well, it's got wheels. What else do you need to know?" Then I'm not going to buy that car. If I were to go into a fancy shop in Beverly Hills and try and buy a Fendi bag, I expect that salesperson to be able to tell me why I'm going to pay $800 for a tiny little clutch, right? They should have some answers to that. Granted, a beer or a cider or whatever it may be doesn't have that same price tag, but you still need to know what it is you're selling. What you're sharing.
Yeah.
That's all part of the process. And no matter what business you're in, I think that's a fair assumption that you know what you're talking about if you're going to talk about it to someone. So
Absolutely. And it goes full circle back to what we were talking about before, which is people these days, when they go out, it should be a special occasion. It should feel special, right? So you do want to have a nice like level of service that makes you feel seen. Somebody's listening to me. They're letting me talk about what my preferences are. And if they can kind of seamlessly match you up with that, that's awesome. And you're probably going to go back to that place over and over and over again. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So then the full circle is completed, right? Like the connection point between
yeah.
all of those channels.
Because if I'm going to pay more money than staying at home and making it
Mhm.
myself, then I should expect more. If I'm going to pay more, I
Exactly.
should expect more. So let's give more. Let's deliver more.
Yeah, definitely.
All
Agreed.
right. Last quick question. Anyone who wants to find you, learn more about what advice and knowledge you have to lay down on them, where can they go to find you?
I always direct people straight to my website. It's spelled like it sounds, which is just notyourhobbymarketing.com. If anybody's curious where that comes from, I always tell folks, if you have customers, you have a business, not a hobby. Not trying to be mean there, but you filed for a business license. It comes with the territory. So,
Yep.
you go straight to the website to find me, notyourhobbymarketing.com. I'm a very small business. It's myself and my husband. So you can find me at Julie at notyourhobbymarketing.com. Very easy. That's my email address. I'm on all the social thingies if you want to track me on there. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. Threads. I'm even on TikTok if you want to find me over there. I have a YouTube channel. it's all Not Your Hobby Marketing. So just go, run around the interwebs and find me there. Yeah.
Well, and
Don't
if I'm
forget,
on a video call or a regular call with you, sometimes I'll hear kids in the background. That's because you do it all and you do it well. So anyone who needs to find know that, Julie's going to knock it out of the park. Dan.
I was just gonna say, don't forget LinkedIn. I love you keep
Oh,
everybody
that's
up.
right.
You keep me in the loop on the news all the time. I find it
Oh,
very
thank
valuable. So
you.
yeah.
I have a personal LinkedIn page at Julie Rhodes, if anybody needs my last name. But then you can find me at like the company page, Not Your Hobby Marketing. And I should also say, I think you guys are on my email list. I have like a little, I don't call it a newsletter. It's called the Bottleneck for dealing with issues in the beverage world. It's kind of funny. There's some, I try to get some business advice across through like funny stories or encounters that I run into, and it'll keep you posted on what I have going on and courses and things that I'm releasing. So yeah, you can sign up for my GIF field email as well.
Yeah. Well, Julie, I always feel smarter just by knowing you. So thank you for being here and sharing all your knowledge. You do a great job at what you do, and anyone who needs their problem solved in a way that's very like honest and direct and open, but still fun, you're the gal to go to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's like you summed up my mission statement that's everywhere. So thank you
Solving
for having
problems with a
me. It's
smile.
a real pleasure. This is awesome. I love sharing time with both of you guys. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming.
The advice on this show is obviously not a one-size-fits-all solution. The goal is to provide ideas that will either work for you or stimulate other ideas on how you can improve your business. We hope these conversations were helpful, but let us know what works well for you. Until next time, cheers.